Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon, and my name is Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan. And it's nice to have so many friends here. I'm in love with the life that the Al-Anon program has given me, to be honest with you. They gave me a topic to speak on tonight. It's the priceless gift of serenity. You know, the priceless gift of serenity. I assure you I wasn't serene walking in the doors of Al-Anon. I promise you that. I'll tell you guys a little bit about my life, a little bit about my story, and then ultimately I'll just give you a little bit of the recipe of how I got to be in a peaceful place. You know, of course the program tools are involved. Some people do it a little more intensely than others. You need them. You know, I grew up in Texas, and growing up, I grew up in a foster home. The town I grew up in Texas was 800 people, so you could say that the best description was rural. It was rural. You'd see signs that would say "dirt for sale." And growing up there, you know, I always knew, I don't know, I always felt just ambivalent toward everything. You know, what happened was my mother couldn't take care of me, so she gave me up. And growing up in this foster home, I had it okay. You know, there was only a certain few times where I remember feeling extremely awkward. You know, I never had parents to call mom and dad growing up. I called my foster parents by their first names. So I remember there was a few times, like when I was younger, when kids would say, like, "Who's your mom and dad?" And I would say, "I don't know," you know. So that was pretty, you know, that was pretty crushing. But things didn't get so bad until, like, I was a teenager. Once I became a teenager, then I started to become, like, a little bit more aware of kind of what happened to me. And my paternal father, he was a very successful man, but he was in full on in his disease. You know, when my mother got pregnant, he basically disowned her and told her to hit the road. But later on, you know, there developed paternity tests and DNA tests. So what ended up happening is, later on when I was a teenager, they went to my dad and said, "Okay, well, now there's DNA tests, you know, so we're going to see if you're the father of this kid." And I ended up being his son, you know, and it was a very heavy ordeal, because then I got this whole other new group of, like, grandparents and, like, this whole other, like, new family that I never knew, and they didn't know me, and it was just extremely uncomfortable. But what happened was they said, "Well, when you turn 18, we're going to make sure you have some money to go to college." And I thought, okay, sweet, you know. No big deal. And then, you know, my mother, she also came back into my life and when I was a teenager. And I had only met her maybe twice up until the time I turned 18. And then once I turned 18, I had found out that she had stolen my identity. You know, as soon as I was 18, like a month after, she had my social security number, and she created a bunch of fake credit cards in my name and these types of things. And then when I was 19, my mother ended up getting sentenced to 6 years in the penitentiary for various crimes. She had had multiple criminal offenses her whole life. And I remember by this time, I had left Texas because I wanted to be independent. And I had moved to California to get an education. And so I remember, you know, my mother had been in prison maybe 1 or 2 years, and she would write me these letters. And I remember seeing the letters, and I wouldn't even read them. I would just toss them in the trash, you know. And people would ask me about my mom, and they would say, "Well, Jonathan, like, where are your parents?" And I would say, like, you know, my mother, she's dead, you know. She's just, that was the level of denial I lived with. I couldn't look at that relationship. I couldn't look at basically I don't know, I just thought it was just too painful. Even if I were to just address the fact that something like this had happened to me, I just couldn't even look at it. And so what ended up happening is I moved to California. I'm 19 now, and you know, I kind of broke ties with my foster family. That was just like, you know, I never really felt accepted by them, and I never really accepted them for who they were either. You know, I always was a really smart kid growing up. In elementary, they would say, we want to pass you a grade, we want to skip you a grade, we put you in the gifted and talented programs, these types of things. And my foster family, I thought I was smarter than them, you know, and I always just kind of like looked down upon them, even though they like raised me, which is just so dumb. But they're really good people, and I'm so lucky that I had them in my life, you know. I don't know what I would do. I don't know where I would be without them. So basically what happened was I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships, because ultimately to me, Al-Anon is all about relationships, but mainly the two most important relationships, and it's the relationship with my higher power and the relationship with myself. But what was happening was I was resenting my mother. I wouldn't speak to her, I wouldn't talk to her, and for 10 years I went on like this, just hating my mother, you know. I just couldn't stand her, and I just thought I just never was going to forgive her. I just was going to Windex her out of my life and be done. But what ended up happening after like a string of relationships, I finally came to the conclusion one night, it was Valentine's Day, and some of you guys know this story. It was Valentine's Day, I was across the street at Mastro's, and I was dating this girl who was the alcoholic in my life. And when she would drink, we would get along great, you know. It was like, but when she wasn't drinking, man, she was irritable, restless, and discontent. That's what they say, right? Irritable, that's what she was like, you know. And so we were over here at this like nice restaurant, right? And we had already started arguing a little bit before. And so the wine list came, and I was crossing my fingers. I thought, I hope she drinks tonight, because if she does, it'll be smooth. But if she doesn't, there's definitely going to be an argument, you know. And so what ended up happening is the wine list came, and she said, I'm not drinking tonight. And I knew it was going to be a long night, you know. It's just how it was, you know. It's just how it was. So she ended up breaking up with me that night, you know. But ultimately, I've never told this story before, but the reason I got into Al-Anon was because of Winona Ryder, right? I was a huge Winona Ryder fan, and I had watched the movie, the Al-Anon movie that she was in. I don't know the name of it. Maybe it's like When Love Is Not Enough, right? So I had already had seen like her struggle, and I was a big softie, and I used to love watching movies. So I would watch that movie because I love Winona Ryder so much. And I remember I would just think, wow, she just struggled so much. But also I used that as a weapon, because when I started fighting with my girlfriend at the time, I was like, you need to go to Al-Anon, you know. That was what we were arguing about. That's why we broke up, because I was forcing her, I was trying to force her into Al-Anon. And and so what ended up happening is she broke up with me that night, and the next day I came to Al-Anon. That was the truth. That was the truth. Next day I looked up the Al-Anon meeting. I was so devastated. I was like, oh my God. And what happened was when she was like, Jonathan, I don't want to date you anymore, I had this moment of clarity where I could see that all the girls I had been dating for the last 10 years behaved just like my mother, you know. I never knew my mother. I never knew her, but her behavior, all the behavior of the girls I would date were just like them. The first girl I dated when I came to California was a long-distance relationship, and I remember I just loved longing for her, you know. I would just think, oh, I can't wait to see you 6 months from now or whatever, you know. And that was it, you know, because the pain from those relationships was touching on the pain that was inside of me, you know. That was the truth, you know. The pain that was manifesting outside was the external manifestation of something that was hurting inside of me, you know. And finally, after dating all of these girls, you know, it's funny, they say when you see red flags coming, it doesn't mean that there's a parade to follow, right? That's what they say, right? You heard that? It's so true, you know. But I would just ignore the red flags, you know. I remember I was dating this girl, and she's like, yeah, I've been arrested 3 times. And I was like, sweet. Because You know, I just love gambling with my emotions, you know. Let's roll the dice. Let's see what happens, you know. So that's how I came into Al-Anon. And my first week into Al-Anon is pretty interesting. I went to this Fullerton meeting, and there was this like lovely Al-Anon lady there, and she was like, you know, she was leading the meeting, and she goes, "Is there anyone who is new?" And I raised my hand. I said, "My name is Jonathan." And she goes, "Oh, welcome, welcome." And then after the meeting, she goes, "How would you like to be the greeter at my workshop, my Fullerton workshop meeting?" And she had this Fullerton workshop meeting, and it was like this all-day Al-Anon extravaganza. Bonnie's been there. She knows. And so what happened was I'm a rule follower. So I thought, if these are the rules of Al-Anon, I'm on board, whatever. Because I was in so much pain, I was like willing. I said, okay, if she wants me to be a greeter at her Al-Anon workshop, I'm there. So I showed up, and I was like handing out these flyers, and I realized that there was like no other men coming, right? So I'm at the door, and I'm handing out all these like, you know, Al-Anon flyers, and then I walk in, and it's like 200 Al-Anons, and only like 5 of them are men. And I thought, wow, whatever, you know. But what happened is like something magical happened that day, and I'll tell you what happened. First, I had a bunch of really Al-Anon, I had a lot of really good Al-Anon cooking. That was the first thing that happened. I thought, wow, these ladies can cook, you know. But secondly, what happened was there's these 2 old-timers in Al-Anon, and I think they had been in Al-Anon like 50 years, you know. And they had like kind of basically brought Al-Anon to Orange County, or they had kind of started a lot of like the Al-Anon when it was new in Orange County. And it was just like such a magical day because I was like the newest person there probably. And they sat me up and they shuffled me up to these like 2 ladies who had been in Al-Anon 50 years. And they were like, you know, Jonathan, if you make this like a lifetime thing, you won't be able to stop your life from getting good. And I made a decision that day. I thought, you know what? I'm going to give this thing a shot. I'm going to try to go to a handful of meetings a week and just really, really put this as a #1 priority in my life. And that's what I did. The next week, I started going to meetings regularly, and by this time, I had bought every piece of literature that was for sale. I had a backpack full of literature, and I was determined, you know, because ultimately, here's what was happening. Every time I would read the Al-Anon literature, the questions they would ask would bring awareness into me where I had only denial before. Every time, it was like there was these dark corners in my mind, and every time I would read this literature, it would shine light in areas that I never knew. I didn't even know I had areas that needed to be addressed. So I ended up getting a sponsor. I started going to a few men's Al-Anon meetings, and we ended up going through the paths to recovery very quickly, and along with that, also the blueprint. And it was very fascinating because what happened was I started having these like spiritual experiences. And each spiritual experience I was having, it was like this life radically changing ordeal. I mean, every time I remember I would be driving along the road and I would look at a tree, and it was as if I had never looked at a tree before, you know. It was as if I had never really used my eyes. It was like everything was 2-dimensional, and all of a sudden it became 3-dimensional. But like something else, you know, like, and that's what I equate to like the grace of God. You know, I feel like the grace of God had descended in my life and started giving me the courage in order to act, because before I was just crippled. You know, I was the kind of person that was like very depressive. I would sleep all day. I was just holding on to that resentment against my mother, and it basically just rotted my ambition. I was the type of person I had fear of success. You know, my best friend's father, he owns he's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and in 2009, I went to New York for 5 weeks, and he was like, you know, you can be a broker, I'll pay you to take the Series 7, I'll pay you to take the Series 66, and you can hang out here and work for me. But I was just so scared, I just couldn't do anything, you know. And I just hated my guts, you know. I just hated myself for that. I just hated myself because I was always getting more and more of these great opportunities, and I was just self-destructing, you know. I was self-destructing through not being able to act, you know. I was just crippled by fear. So what ended up happening after not speaking to my mom for 10 years, I decided I was going to go forgive her. And, right, what do we say now? I was going to forgive her for me, right? And that was it. Like, I had so much literature, but the main focus on the literature I put was on the Just for Today bookmark. And it's still really that simple today. Like, I'm always saying, like, higher power, make me an instrument of thy peace. Higher power, make me an instrument of thy peace. Because, left to my own devices, I always say that I can go 0 to rotten in no time, you know what I mean? I can get, like, so ugly. And this morning it came out a little bit. It's Friday, it's the end of the week. I'm, like, running on, like, low sleep. I'm just, like, getting along. And my friend said something I didn't agree with, and I just, like, I don't know, just like shouted something at him. And so it's still to this day, I can get into that place where I don't want to be forgiving. Back to my mother. So what ended up happening is one Christmas I was back in Texas, and my grandmother had passed away. My mom was in a hospital, and what had happened was she had been, there's no really other way to put it. She had been kicked out of the place she was living, and she had actually, she had spent some nights outdoors, and she was dying of, she had already had hepatitis C, and she had gone through interferon treatments, and she had been drinking again, and she was just this, like, ugly color of yellow. And what happened was I went down to this hospital. I drove like 40 minutes away, and I went down to this hospital, and I walked in that hospital room, and I looked at this woman's face, and all of a sudden it became like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was like looking directly in the eyes of God. I don't have any other way to describe it. It was like I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I just came to see if there's anything I can do, like, to help, But what happened was she was, like, kind of conscious. She, like, kind of knew what was going on, and they were trying to decide what, like, state hospital to put her in. And I looked at her and I said, "Listen, you and I both know," because she had already had, like, some experience from AA. Because when I was younger, like, one time she came and picked me up, and she had taken me to an Alano club, and they had Alateen there. So I had already been exposed a little bit to Alateen, and I had already known that she was, like, at one point in her life, she had it going, like, in the right direction. And so the doctors are all in there, and I said, "Listen," like, I couldn't even call my mother by her name, I couldn't even call her mom. I said, "Margot, listen, you and I both know that you don't belong in the psychiatric ward or whatever. You just belong back in Alcoholics Anonymous." And she was like, "He's right. Please don't put me in the psychiatric ward, So they ended up getting her in a treatment center, and I'm happy to say, like, what do they say? They say here in Al-Anon, I love what they say. They say, changed attitudes aid recovery. And that's what happened. When I took that anger away from my mother, and I showed her, not only with my words, but with my actions, that I could forgive this woman.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
The healing process started to begin, and I'm happy to say my mother, she's been sober 2 years now, 2 years, I can't believe it. And that's, like, through only the grace of God, man. I mean, this is, like, it's too good, At Christmas time, I was back in Texas this time. That was years ago. In Christmas time, I was back in Texas this time. And I called her up and said, "Hey, I'm in town visiting, and how would you like to go to an NBA basketball game?" And I took her to the Spurs-Rockets basketball game on Christmas Day. We had box seats. We had a huge buffet. Picked her up from her sober living, took her to the game, and that's it, I mean, if that's not, like, a testament to the grace of God, like, I don't know what is, The evidence in my life of, like, God's hand working in my life it's just too powerful, it's just too much. And then, with my dad was also, like, very troubled. Him and I, we had a tumultuous relationship based upon me manipulating him for material things. That was what it was always about. My dad and I never were close. I never called him Dad. I called him by his first name. And what happened, like, since I came into Al-Anon, I felt so much forgiveness, I felt so much forgiveness for these people, so much compassion. that what ended up happening is I got to a place where I became self-supporting. And then once I became self-supporting, I was able to not ask my dad for money. And then once I got in a place where it wasn't about money anymore, that's when like the healing process started to begin with my dad. And then once I was able to like forgive my dad and like start to mend that relationship, all the relationships with the men in my life started to improve. All of a sudden I started having these like really healthy male figures in my life. And I equate that to ultimately just like as I healed, like the male energy in me started to heal, you know, and as I forgave my mom, like the feminine energy in me started to heal. And now I have like so many women friends and so many man friends, and I don't know, I'm just so lucky. Before, everything was surface level. Everything was pretense. You know, I was always trying to keep it together on the outside to make sure that no one knew what was really going on. And, you know, the things I was doing was this, like, I remember one year I needed, I convinced my dad that I needed this like really nice car. And I said, look, if you buy me this car, you know, things will be okay, you know. And so he bought me the car. He bought me this BMW M3, you know, and I got caught driving at 154 miles an hour, you know, and on the toll road, and they took my license for a year. I was so embarrassed. I started driving anyway. This was before I was in Al-Anon, by the way. I was just not all there, you know, and I just kept driving anyway, and then I got caught driving on a suspended and just started racking up tickets. But that's the kind of person I am. Like, when I'm like in that place of low self-esteem and just massive amounts of self-hatred, I just don't take care of anything. You know, I let the bills pile up, you know, the collection people call me, all these things, you know. I'm just, that low self-esteem is just like, I'm just such a piece of shit, let's just keep adding on more crap as I go, you know. So what ended up happening is I came in, so I'm in Al-Anon now, I'm going to skip forward. So I'm in Al-Anon now, I'm working a program, and I'm starting to have all these spiritual awakenings deeper and deeper and deeper, and I started taking up the practice of meditation. So what ended up happening is I would wake up every morning and I would just meditate for hours a day. And I became so peaceful inside. And my friends all started to like disown me. Like all my old friends were like, Jonathan, someone has came and like taken your body. You're like not the same person. And I was like, no, I am the same person. Like I'm finally okay, you know. And so what happened was I got into a place where I was self-supporting. I ended up paying off all my debt. I started going through the steps, working the steps, going to meetings, reading the literature. And then I had another gigantic breakthrough, and it was from the Path to Recovery book. It talks about making amends to people who are deceased in the 9th step. And my dad's father was this Harvard attorney who was extremely successful. He had started our family's company, and you know, he was this just really eccentric guy. But you know what? I never really got to meet him. And I was so resentful at him because him and my grandmother, who were also passed away, they knew about me like whenever I was little, you know. And they like didn't do anything. And I just thought, like, these people are just like so cold-blooded, you know. And I thought, never am I going to be able to forgive them, you know. Like, how am I going to make this right? And also, I was dating a girl like in 2006 before I came to Al-Anon who had what happened was she ended up passing away. We broke up, and she ended up having a drug overdose, and she died. And so I had her on the list, on the amends, and my grandparents on the list who were deceased. And I thought, how am I going to be able to make these amends? And then I discovered in the Path to Recovery, it says, when making amends to those who are deceased, we write a letter, invite our higher power into the room, and try to read this letter out loud. And that's what I did. I got out my pen and pad, and I wrote my grandparents a letter. I said, you know, listen, I'm trying to move forward in my life, and if you guys can forgive me for resenting you, I'll meet you halfway, you know. And I said a prayer. I said, God, you know, please protect me. And what happened was I wrote these letters, and I went to bed that night, and I was crying, you know. I had felt this huge release mentally. And I went to bed, I was crying, and all of a sudden I woke up from this dream, and all of a sudden I had this white light spiritual experience. And I heard this like intuitive voice that said, keep on going, you're on the right track. And I don't know what that was. I don't try to describe it, but I know for me, like that was just the depth of the healing that I was willing to go to, you know, because it had started to feel good to live good. And I hope if there's anyone who is new, like if it starts to feel good to live good, just keep on going, you know, just keep on going. Keep deepening your spiritual practice, whatever it is, attending meetings, calling your sponsor, working steps, reading the literature, all these great program tools. So what happened was I decided to take meditation a little more seriously. Also, I learned to cook. You know, I say that Al-Anon gave me enough self-esteem to give me my ambition back. And so now, like, my favorite thing to do in the world is cook. I love cooking. I love French cooking. And last year I went to Paris. I spent 5 weeks there. It was so nice, you know. And I've gotten to do all of the things like I've always wanted to do. I always say ultimately that Al-Anon has turned me into the person that I've always wanted to become. And I can't believe it, you know. I can't believe it. So I'm in Al-Anon, and there's this friend of mine named Antonio. And what happened, the story of my friend Antonio is 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I met him in Las Vegas randomly. And he was a guy from Greece. And we had met randomly. We had spent a few days together just talking, playing cards, running around Vegas, just having a good time, you know. And 5 years later, I bump into him randomly in Los Angeles. And he's like, hey, don't you remember me from like Las Vegas like 5 years ago? And I'm like, what? Okay. Nothing, I didn't think anything of it. Another year goes by. I bump into him again, like randomly. And so this time, you know, I'm living a spiritual life. I think, well, there must be something to this. So we exchange numbers, and I say, hey, you know, you want to go play basketball sometime? Something like this. And he says, sure, you know, sure. So what happened was a couple months go by, and I get this random text message from him. And he says, hey, Jonathan, I hope you're doing okay. I'm just thinking about you. And I knew, like, something was up. Intuitively, I knew, like, something was up. So I texted him back, and I said, hey, how's it going? And he says, not so good. And so I immediately called him and said, hey, you know, what's going on? And he goes, you know what, man, I'm out here. I'm from Greece. I have no friends. I'm living in America. You know, how would you like to, you know, have lunch? And I thought, well, there's probably like some kind of hook in this. Like, I don't know. Like, I started kind of getting a weird vibe, and I just said, you know what, I'll meet you for lunch. And so I met up with him, and he had seen me before, you know, and so then he had saw like the radical transformation that had happened in my life. And I said, yeah, Antonio, like I've been going to these meetings, I've been working these steps in Al-Anon, and I thought for sure he was going to ask me for money. I thought that this was definitely what this was about. And he sat me down and he said, you know, I have to be honest with you, I haven't been back to my country because I'm wanted by the police in my country. And like I'm on the run. And I thought, wow, you know, I knew it was about money. And I thought, you know, okay. And he says, you know, I'm not here to ask you for money, I just need a friend. So I walk him out to my car and I say, look, you know, look at the Serenity Prayer. And I opened up the Pastor Recovery book and I said, look, there's the Serenity Prayer. And he read it and he started to cry. And so what happened was he asked me, like, is there anything you can do to help me? And I started getting some of his life story out. And what happened with him is he had this huge resentment against his oldest brother. His oldest brother was named Paul. And so I got him to like start writing some of the inventory and like start to journal. And so he got this resentment out on paper, right? And he one night he was sharing with me, he's like, you know, my brother Paul, he's my half-brother, he hired my father in a company and then he fired my father, and I'll never forgive him for the rest of my life. If I ever see him, you know, I want to give him like a punch in the face. And I said, Antonio, listen, this is what's blocking you. Like, this is what's keeping you from like progressing. And so what ended up happening is I told him, I said, listen, why don't you write a letter to Paul? And why don't you try to mend that relationship and try to get on good terms with your brother? Because I did that with me. I did that in my life, and it worked out pretty well for me. And he goes, you know what, Jonathan, I'm gonna take your advice. So he wrote his brother a letter, and his brother from Greece writes back and says, you know, Antonio, I haven't talked to you in 10 years. I'm so thrilled. I hope we can like build our friendship back together. And then that year for Christmas, Paul brought all of the family over from Greece to like meet Antonio, and they invited me to Christmas. And they sat me down and they were like, you know, you brought our whole family back together. Like, what can we do for you? And I said, I didn't do this. I said, the steps of Al-Anon did this, you know. These are the principles I learned in Al-Anon. And so they have a nice Christmas, and then Paul pulls me aside and he says, listen, I haven't spoken to my dad in 15 years. And he goes, I've seen what you've done with my brother. My brother's like completely different, you know. And they were like, you know, they didn't even like speak good English. They're like these people from Greece, and they're like, you're like Saint Jonathan to us, you know. They were like, we want to like give you flowers every day, you know. We want to do something for you. And I'm like, you guys don't have to do anything for me, you know. So here's the story with Paul. So Paul's like, look, man, you've like completely helped my brother out. You know, he's this guy from nowhere. You know, he had no friends. And you took him under your wing and you completely helped him out. And he's like, but I need you to like help me too. And I said, well, what can I do? And he goes, well, I want to help Antonio out. So he went back to Greece. He got Antonio an attorney. And they did some kind of deal where through the legal process, the statute of limitations had been lifted. He got free from the case. Antonio met an American girl. He got married, got American citizenship or a green card. So like he's flying high, you know. But Paul's like, you know, what can you do for me? You know, what can you do for me? So I know that's what they were saying. They were like crying, you know, Christmas, you know. They hadn't had Christmas in 10 years. It was unbelievable. So Paul says, you know, what can you do for me? I too am resentful. I have a resentment. I haven't spoken to my dad. We have different fathers. I haven't spoken to my dad in some 15 years. And I said, well, tell me the story, you know. Talk to me a little bit about this. And by this time, you know, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I think, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm kind of like I'm feeling pretty spiritual, you know. Because my life took on a whole new purpose. That's really the truth. You know, it was a purpose that was like beyond blind faith. You know, all of a sudden my relationship with God started coming from a place of knowing rather than just guessing. And so if you're like new to take up spiritual life, I hope that happens for you. So Paul says, my dad, I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. He had a stroke. He's in a coma. He's in this old folks home. And I said, well, that's interesting, you know. I said, why don't you go visit him in the old folks home when you go back to Greece? Like, see what happens, you know. Just see. So he goes back to Greece, right? And he says that he walks in the room of the old folks' home. He sees his dad there in a coma, right? He walks over and he looks in his dad in the face. And he said he looked his dad in the face and all of a sudden tears started streaming down from his dad's face. And he called me and he said, Jonathan, I've been a stonewall atheist my entire life. He said, but in that moment I came to believe in God. And my life is forever changed for that. And then he ended up moving to Oceanside, and now he lives here, and I see him too. You know? And they all just think I'm like some kind of angel, man. I mean, they don't know what Al-Anon is really, or like, you know, they just think, wow, like this guy like really cares about people, you know. This guy really like truly cares, you know. But ultimately, you know, I was in this place where I was meditating so much, I was just in this intuitive place. You know, I was just in the zone. Life had started to become effortless. I felt as if God was just working through me. And that's still how I feel. If there's anything good going on in my life, it's by the grace of God. And if there's anything bad in my life, it's some, you know, dirt or dust on my heart that I still need to work on, you know. Some character defect I still need to polish out. And that's how I feel. So that was pretty amazing. And
to obtain additional copies, receive a free catalog of AA and Al-Anon talks, or to find out about our tape and CD of the Month Club, call Encore Audio Archives at 1-800-878-1308, or visit our website at www.12steptapes.com.
I guess I'll talk a little bit about, you know, you know what I'll do? I'm just going to share a quote, and then I'm going to tell another story, and then I'm going to sit down. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, you know. I have relationships with my father. I'm on good terms with my father. Ultimately, I'll be honest with you guys. I've gotten into a place spiritually where I can't not be current with people. Like, I can't, like, have resentment anymore. There's, like, something in me, like, if I, like, pop off or if I do something absurd, I, like, immediately have to make an amends. You know, that's just, like, where I'm at. Because I do so much meditation that I can't stand having, like, some kind of irritation going on in my mind. And that's a beautiful place to be, you know, to try to live without resentment, to try to live without anger and fear. Because before I came into Al-Anon, I lived in fear, and I only had glimpses of serenity. And now I'm here to tell you guys, I live in peace, and I have only rare glimpses of fear. That's the truth, you know. And it's all from that 11th step, you know. And the steps are in order for a reason. So if you decide when you get on the 11th step to take up a serious practice in meditation, that's a good thing, you know. I always read the scientific benefits of meditation. You know, I'm always reading these studies on people who have meditated a long time and like the effects it has on their brain. You know, it increases the gray matter, it improves memory, it improves like multitasking, it takes away anxiety, depression. It's like basically like a natural drug. And it's like God's drug, you know. That's what I use it for anyway, you know. It's like my higher power's drug. But you know, I'm just going to share this quote and then I'm going to sit down. You know, ultimately I want to thank Liz and Pam and all the people who have put this on, this convention. Gosh, you know, what a great service to have, to be able to come here and be around so many loving people. You know, my cup runneth over. Anyway, here goes the quote. The program of Al-Anon is not a program of personal success stories. Instead, these are the stories of colossal human failure transformed into the happiest kind of usefulness through the divine alchemy of the loving grace of God. And this last story is a story of the accountant. There was an accountant, it was tax season. He had a 5-year-old son. The son wanted to go outside and throw the baseball. The dad was too busy, you know, he didn't want to play. The son was relentless. He said, Dad, please, please, I want to go play baseball. The dad looks on his desk. He has a National Geographic. On the back of the National Geographic, there's a world map. He tears out the world map. He gives his son the tape. He tears the map into like 100 pieces. And he says, son, put this world map together. And when you're done, we'll go play baseball. Son runs out of the room. Father thinks, gosh, you know, bought myself some time. Son comes back 5 minutes later. Map was completely put back together. The father says, son, this is impossible. How did you do this? He said, Dad, it was real easy. On the back of the map, there was a picture of a man. I put the man back together, and the whole world fell into place. You guys have a good night. Thanks a lot.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.